September 2024. Havana goes dark. Not just a blackout, a collapse. Hospitals switch to generators. The generators fail. Gas stations run dry. Lines stretch for miles. Factories shut down, completely. Cuba's strategic oil reserve hits critical. 15 days of supply remaining. This isn't a natural disaster. It's not a hurricane, not an embargo extension. This is what happens when an entire island's energy lifeline gets severed, and the world barely noticed. This is the story of how Cuba is running out of time, and what it reveals about the fragility of nations that depend on a single source for survival. To understand Cuba's oil crisis, you need to understand one thing. Cuba produces almost no oil. The island has minimal petroleum reserves, extracts maybe 50,000 barrels per day. Sounds like a lot until you realize Cuba needs 120,000 barrels daily just to function. That's a 70,000 barrel daily deficit every single day. So where does Cuba get the rest? For decades, the Soviet Union. Subsidized oil, favorable trade deals, guaranteed supply. Cuba's entire economy was built on this relationship. Then, 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. Cuba enters what they call the special period. Economic freefall. Oil imports drop 50% overnight. Electricity rationed to 4 hours daily in some regions. The average Cuban loses 20 pounds from food shortages. Then, salvation arrives, Venezuela. Hugo Chavez takes power, socialist alliance with Cuba. Venezuela starts shipping oil, lots of it. At its peak, 115,000 barrels per day, below market price, sometimes just in exchange for Cuban doctors. Cuba rebuilds its entire infrastructure around Venezuelan oil. Power plants designed for Venezuelan heavy crude, transportation fleet dependent on steady supply, healthcare system running on guaranteed fuel. But there's a problem with building your entire civilization on someone else's oil. What happens when that someone else collapses too? Venezuela's oil production in 1999, 3 million barrels per day. Venezuela's oil production in 2024, 400,000 barrels per day. An 87% collapse. What happened? Corruption, mismanagement, sanctions, brain drain. PDVSA, the state oil company, fell apart. Experienced engineers fled, equipment broke, no investment in maintenance. Refineries that once hummed 24/7 now sit silent. Wells that could produce sit capped because there's no infrastructure to move the oil. Shipments to Cuba start dropping. 2016, 90,000 barrels per day. 2020, 60,000 barrels per day. 2023, 35,000 barrels per day. 2024, under 30,000. Cuba's deficit grows every month. Cuba starts scrambling, looking for alternatives. Russia, interested, but logistics are a nightmare. Too far, too expensive. Mexico sells some, but not nearly enough, and requires hard currency Cuba doesn't have. Algeria, a few shipments, nothing consistent. The problem is Cuba has no money. Foreign reserves estimated under $10 billion, mostly tied up. International credit, terrible. Decades of defaults. Can't borrow, can't buy at market rates. Meanwhile, the entire power grid is geriatric. Average age of Cuba's 8 main power plants over 40 years. They were designed to run on Soviet or Venezuelan heavy crude. Here's the technical problem. Different crude oils have different chemical properties. Venezuela produces heavy crude, thick, sulfur-rich. Cuba's plants are calibrated for this. When Cuba tries to use lighter crude from other sources, efficiency drops 30 to 40%. Maintenance issues multiply. The mechanisms of collapse. Step 1. Less oil arrives from Venezuela. Step 2. Power plants run on partial capacity. Step 3. Rolling blackouts become standard. Step 4. Factories can't maintain production schedules. Step 5. Economic output drops. Step 6. Even less foreign currency to buy oil. Step 7. Return to Step 1. Loop intensifies. It's not a crisis, it's a death spiral. September 18, 2024. The spiral hits terminal velocity. Cuba's national electrical grid suffers total collapse, all of it offline. 6 million people in darkness, hospitals operating by candlelight, ventilators stop, dialysis machines go silent, water pumps stop working, no running water in Havana. Food and refrigeration spoils within hours, in a country where food is already rationed. Cell towers die, internet goes down, Cuba becomes an information black hole. The government scrambles, emergency protocols. They manage to restore power after 3 days, partial power. Then it happens again, October 10th. Total grid collapse again. This time it takes 5 days to restore. The Prime Minister makes a rare admission. We are in an energy emergency of unprecedented magnitude. Behind closed doors, the calculation is simple. Cuba's strategic oil reserves, the absolute emergency stockpile, has 15 days of supply remaining. 15 days to find a new supplier, secure emergency credit, negotiate a geopolitical miracle, or face something Cuba hasn't experienced since 1991, complete economic shutdown. The government makes the call, ration everything. 4 hours of electricity per day in residential areas, priority to hospitals and water treatment. Everything else, dark.
Nickel mining, Cuba's second largest export, shut down. Sugar refineries, offline. Tourism infrastructure, Cuba's economic lifeline, crippled. People take to the streets, rare in Cuba. Dangerous. They're banging pots, chanting. The government deploys security forces. This is the turning point, when a nation realizes its survival model has failed. The immediate consequence, exodus. Cubans start building rafts. Again, U.S. Coast Guard reports surge in interdictions. October 2024, 4,000 Cubans attempt the crossing to Florida, more than any month since the 1990s. These aren't just the desperate. Doctors, engineers, teachers, the people Cuba can least afford to lose. Cuba's healthcare system, internationally praised, starts collapsing from within. Brain drain accelerates. The economic ripple. Tourism, Cuba's main industry, takes massive hit. Hotels can't guarantee electricity. Resorts close temporarily. International bookings drop 60%. Cruise lines reroute away from Havana. Revenue from tourism down $2 billion annually. Agriculture, without fuel for tractors and irrigation, planting season is disaster. Food production drops another 30%. Cuba already imports 60% of its food, now it's closer to 80%, but with no foreign currency to pay for it. Ration books from the 1990s come back. Lines for basic goods stretch 4 hours. The geopolitical consequence. Cuba goes hat in hand to everyone. China provides some humanitarian aid, loans for renewable projects, but no oil bailout. Spain offers technical assistance, small credit line. Russia, political support, weapons, but meaningful oil shipments? Too expensive. Cuba appeals to the UN, humanitarian crisis. Some aid flows, nowhere near what's needed. The United States still maintaining the embargo. Some voices call for a humanitarian exception on fuel, gets nowhere politically. Venezuela tries to increase shipments, manages to bump up to 40,000 barrels per day for a few weeks, then their own crisis deepens, drops back to 28,000. The Cuban government faces impossible choices. Option 1, open the economy dramatically, free market reforms, attract foreign investment, but this threatens the entire political system they've maintained for 65 years. Option 2, double down on rationing, centralized control, weather the storm, but without oil, there's no economy to control. Option 3, pivot to renewables immediately. Cuba starts emergency renewable projects, solar farms, wind turbines, Chinese investment. But here's the reality. Building renewable infrastructure, 3 to 5 years minimum. Cuba's oil reserves, 15 days. You can't solar panel your way out of a 15-day crisis. So what actually happens? Cuba enters a new special period, but this time there's no Venezuela waiting to save them. Life adapts. Electricity, 4 to 6 hours daily in most areas. Transportation, oxen replace tractors in agriculture. Bicycles replace cars in cities. Work, businesses operate on compressed schedules around power availability. The informal economy explodes. Black market for everything. Diesel, gasoline, food. Those with dollars, family in the U.S. sending remittances, survive. Those without, suffer. Inequality widens dramatically in a supposedly socialist state. Social tension reaches levels not seen since the 1990s. The regional consequence. Cuba's collapse sends shockwaves through the Caribbean. Refugee flows strain neighboring islands. Remittance-dependent economies feel the pain. But the global lesson is bigger. This is what happens to any nation completely dependent on one supplier for survival. Look at Cuba from space at night. The Dominican Republic glows. Jamaica has consistent light. Cuba, mostly dark. Islands of light in a sea of blackness. For 65 years, Cuba built its identity on defiance. Defiance of the United States. Defiance of capitalism. Defiance of the global order. But you can't defy physics. You can't run a modern nation without energy, and you can't build energy independence on someone else's oil. Cuba now stands at a crossroads faced by many nations. Ideology versus survival, pride versus pragmatism, the system they've defended for decades versus the future. There is a path forward, renewables, economic reform, diversification, but it requires admitting the old model failed. 15 days became 15 months of struggle. The oil didn't completely run out. Venezuela sends just enough to prevent total collapse. A few other suppliers provide dribs and drabs, but Cuba never returns to what it was. The young generation grows up in darkness, literally, learning to live with 4 hours of power, studying by candlelight, building futures with no guarantees. Cuba's oil didn't run out in 15 days, but the dream of revolutionary self-sufficiency did. Sometimes the fall isn't sudden. Sometimes it's just the slow dimming of lights until you realize the darkness has become normal. Here's my question. If you were Cuba's leader right now, what would you do? Maintain the system and endure the darkness, or reform everything and risk losing your identity? There's no easy answer. Drop your solution in the comments. And if this made you think differently about energy dependence, share it. Because Cuba isn't the only country living 15 days from collapse.